Welcome back to another episode of Learner's Permit. This week's episode features Joe Bartel, and Joe and I sat down and talked mainly about the art of writing songs and what goes into a good song. Much of our conversation was centered around Joe's most recent album, Are You Even Nice, which came out in 2016, but we also spoke about the process of writing music and recording an album in more general terms as well. So if you've ever wondered about what it takes to record a DIY album, this is the episode for you. And before we begin, my apologies for the audio issues in this episode. Joe and I had less than an ideal connection, and it caused a couple of audio issues in a couple of places, but we powered through it, and I hope you can too. So without further ado, I bring you this week's episode of Learner's Permit. Jump on in. Okay, Joe, thank you so much for coming here today. I'm super excited to interview you, actually. Our mutual friend Ryan Shelberg really likes to gush about you, so it's an honor to have you here, really.
It's my privilege, thank you.
So after hearing your album several times now this week, I have a question for you, and that is, if you could be masterful in any instrument that you have never picked up, which instrument would you choose to just have complete mastery over?
I would love to be a great accordionist. Man, they sound so good. I love playing the melodica, so it's sort of a similar input with just like a keyboard-based reed instrument, but I don't know, I just have a real appreciation for people who can belt out a good song on those things.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So the album is Are You Even Nice? And I have listened to it several times, like I said, and it feels so intimate. You know, like every time I listen to this album, I feel like I crawled up into your head. And I wonder if there are any themes which you would feel uncomfortable writing about, because it really seemed that you've covered kind of a breadth of issues ranging from like rage to like psychological health to almost like a sense of nihilism to romance.
Sure.
Is there anything that you would feel like, you know, that's off limits? I don't really want to touch that.
I suppose not particularly. I'll write. The only thing I wouldn't write is something that I didn't feel was true to myself, I guess, as corny as maybe that answer sounds. But I mean, I write songs that are true and are based on real events or based on myself, and I also write things that are not true. You know, lies, I guess, lies in maybe a storytelling format. But I would say, you know, as long as I feel that it's something that interests me or is true to myself as a writer, then it's something I would pursue writing.
It's all on the table. Okay.
I suppose so, yeah.
Do you, most of the songs are from first person in this album. I think maybe only, I'm forgetting the name of the title, but You Don't Deserve It As Good As You Have It.
Sure, yeah.
I think that was the only one in second person. Would you, are all the songs kind of a true reflection of how you were feeling when you wrote it, or were they kind of like a fictitious like exploration into like how someone in that point of view would feel?
There's definitely a bit of both. I mean, like I said before, like using the word I doesn't necessarily mean that I'm talking about myself maybe, but it also doesn't not mean that. I feel like it's kind of like a storytelling tradition, or maybe even just a folk music tradition, to kind of relay of an event or an experience as through your own eyes, or maybe as though you were there to witness it, when really maybe you're relaying a story in general. I don't know. Maybe, you know, it's like you pick up a book, I suppose, and it's told from the first person, but, you know, it's all fiction in the end.
Yeah, that's true. And I've always thought that was maybe one of the strengths that rock and, like, I guess guitar-based music has over something like rap music, where Rap and hip hop is, at least traditionally, has been really based upon this idea of like authenticity, of like really
Right.
like writing who you are, and it seems like in general, rock music isn't really constrained to that, where
Right.
you can write first person and it can be about things which have never happened to you and which are unrelated to you, and you catch no flack for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are folk and blues standards all over the place that are, I mean, all over that theme of just kind of telling a story, but not necessarily. It's just like that. It's a folk tale almost.
Yeah. So I guess jumping into the album itself, into some of the mechanics of it, I'm really interested in the process of writing a song for you specifically. Like, I've spoken to a couple artists, and I wondered for you if you begin your songs with like a guitar riff that you like, or like a catchy line which you wrote, or maybe like a feeling that you wanted to evoke. Do you
Right.
find like a common pattern with most of the songs that you write?
I mean, I think a lot of the songs I write come in sorts of different ways, and I mean, every writer kind of has their own way of approaching things. But I mean, I've written songs in different ways before. I mean, a lot of the guitar work comes separately from the lyricism, I feel. Like I would say a lot of the musical aspect of my songs just comes from me jamming around, playing around with chords and riffs and progressions, and if I find something I like, I might use it, and if not, I'm just messing around anyway. And there are a lot of riffs I find myself just kind of coming back to, and chord progressions and the like. And as far as lyrics, that's kind of its own whole process as far as what's the song going to be about, how's it going to go that way. Like I've got a pretty big pile, like I got a lot of notebooks and just like stacks of scrap paper with ideas for lyrics and song story ideas, etc. And I mean, it kind of all just comes to how am I going to piece it all together.
Okay, so do you have songs which can kind of be made piecemeal through, several different journals, several different entries?
Yeah, I would say there is a lot of piecemeal work to at least some of my songwriting. Some of it comes more naturally, like there are songs I've written entirely in one burst, and there are songs that I've, kind of carved like a piece of wood throughout a period of time, and just took a piece here and a piece there, and eventually I had the final product in my hand.
Sure. Yeah. There was a period when I was really tinkering with poetry and my
Right.
downtime. Actually, it was the first time I was in Norway. My phone stopped working, so instead of having the ability to browse Reddit on public transportation, I was
Right.
like writing poetry.
Sure.
And it would always be for me that like if I didn't feel like my muse, if I didn't feel an inspiration, it would be shit, and I would never come back to it, and I'd never like try to borrow some lines from that period. But it makes a lot of sense to kind of have an archive of creativity that you can draw from.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, like, I have an idea throughout the day, and I have like a little pocket notebook, and I just write a little line in my head that was floating through my head, and just make sure it doesn't float away and it stays in the notebook somewhere. And I've drawn from that a lot. And I mean, I would say as far as, it's kind of like making a mosaic, or it's like making a painting. It's its own kind of art, and there's no wrong way to do it necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. And as for like the end product of a song, do you really pay attention to your songs being like stories within themselves, which are self-contained, or do you have like an end goal for like when you're satisfied with a song, when you know a song is enough?
That's kind of something, yeah, that you have to practice and really think about what your vision is, I guess. I don't know if I necessarily have done that all the time in the past. It's sort of, I mean, sorry, kind of trying to think about how I want to phrase these thoughts. I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm kind of blanking here. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. When do you know when a song is done? Like when can you sit back and think like, oh, this is a complete work. Like I can make this track number 5 and I'm happy here.
I would say honestly, I write a lot of my songs so individually that I'm not always thinking about the end goal of creating an album while I'm writing. I kind of just focus more on the song at hand, and then when I've got the handful, I decide when it's time to record and when it's time to release. But really, as far as knowing when a song is done, it's kind of you're feeling in the dark. You just gotta does it feel right? Have I said exactly what I'm trying to say? If I were to try to say more, would it just be reiterating or forcing it too much or talking too much maybe? And you also have to consider, have I said everything I need to say in the terms of, is it all there? Does more need to be said about this?
Yeah. And like to that end, it like almost thinking about it now, it makes me almost compare a song to like a story, like a novel. Like there is a clear beginning, middle, and end, and there is a plot which, may or may not unfold during the song.
Right. And I mean, like a 100-page novel and a 1,000-page novel are both equally valid. A song doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be more than a minute, and it doesn't need to be under 5 minutes if you really are trying to create a vision in that sense and execute it fully.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, going back to it, like when I think of a long song, the only thing which I benefit from over like a 1-minute song or 2-minute song is always going to be instrumentalization. And,
right.
And I mean, like I'm going back to like some of Idea and Ability's second album because I've been bumping that the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
I mean, he has Forgive Me for My Synapses, which is like I think under 2 minutes, and it's just like a barrage of him just like yelling everything that he wants to about human behavior based off of neurobiology. And you don't need a 10-minute song for that. In the same way that you can read a short story that can be as impactful to you as a Game of Thrones novel.
Yeah, exactly. There's no wrong way to consume or create art, really, as long as you're saying what you're attempting to say.
Yeah. Well, to that end, do you pay much attention to like how long each song is? Do you give yourself like a minimum, like, okay, it needs to be at least 3 verses, gotta have a bridge, gotta get a hook in there?
No, I feel like that stuff should kind of come a bit more organically and develop around the song itself as opposed to something you want to force. But I won't say I didn't take note of it. I would say that's something that you have to separate yourself from as an artist versus like a producer. I mean, I've created all of my own albums just on my, doing self-recording on my own computer in my own studio. But so while I'm writing it, these aren't really as big considerations. But while I was producing the album, laying down all the tracks and thinking about how it's going to come together as a final product, I did do a lot of thinking like that. Like, okay, this track is in this key, it runs for this length. How's it going to run with all these other tracks? And how's it going to become more cohesive as opposed to just being a song itself? And I suppose those are just different points in the process. But I mean, it also comes after the song is finished in my mind. So I would say it's a separate point in the process, and almost like a separate role in the like a separate role I'm playing in the creation of the album.
Sure. Yeah, and then that makes sense when you take it in conjunction with what you said about like you liking to write songs, to write a song, not necessarily to write something which is going to fit into an album later on.
Right.
That makes sense in that framework. So speaking about different keys that you'd have, do you try to make sure that you have like a variation of I guess of composition between your songs within your album? Do you really care? Like, I'm in a major key here, so I can maybe do 2 more of those, but then I need a minor, and I've got to have a ballad in here somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I suppose as far as that's also definitely part of the production side more than the artist side.
Mm-hmm.
And I did do a lot of thinking like that. You know, what key is this song in, and like how does it? What's the? I suppose what's the mood or the feel of the song, and how are we going to create an arc with it?
Sure. Okay. So separating the artist from the producer, do you feel that that's more productive for you to like be in two different modes, to be in a I am now a recording artist who is, fishing for inspiration, and then later on after you have a body of work, do you feel like, okay, I'm now in producer mode, time to get critical about what I've written and how it can fit together?
I definitely actually do. I do wear those different hats when I need to. I would say the songs themselves come. I kind of go through shifts month to month almost, where I am whether or not I'm actually recording or writing. I play out a lot, so I do kind of keep my writing fresh and keep a repertoire of new songs being worked on. So I work on those without regard necessarily for how they'll be recorded, and I kind of understand that this song needs to be able to be performed myself first and foremost, as well as I try to focus more on the performance of the song initially, I suppose, than the recording composition, and that kind of comes later when I'm wearing the other hat.
Sure. And by play out, do you mean like play a gig somewhere?
Yeah, exactly. I would say I play an open mic or at a house show or a gig probably at least once a week.
Okay, cool. Has that picked up since Are You Even Nice came out?
Honestly, yeah, I go to open mics pretty regularly, just for it's for fun. If I was going to be heading to a bar that night anyway, I might as well do something like that. So I've met a lot of people that way, and kind of built working in that community, as well as the house show scene, which is always a bit more underground, but always is fun. So
Sure, yeah. I'm sure they each have their strengths.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So when you're writing a song, do you try to pay attention to your metering between each line, or like do you think about your your time scale? Did you think like, okay, I've got to have like four beats here, and then I've got to do like an A B rhyme format so that people keep up with what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I think in those terms a bit more than I would actually like to. I think, um, but honestly, as far as just I suppose Western songwriting goes, those are the patterns that we've kind of come to know and love. The verse chorus, A B sort of those the song structure that is ubiquitous in Western pop music, basically. But so I try to avoid that when I can. Maybe just, but I mean, I don't do it as consciously as as I wish I, because it can be so limiting to think in those terms. But they're just part of the, I guess, the songwriting narrative as it is, that songs have choruses, songs have verses, songs have bridges, and I suppose one way to kind of get out of that mindset as a creative, as a songwriter, I suppose it helps to think of a song instead of a verse or a chorus. Just think of it as a section. This section might have a similar motif to the other sections, but it's also not. I don't have to call it a verse, or I don't have to call it a verse if I don't want to.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there have been a plethora of pretty successful people who do that. I mean, I don't know how many people in kind of like a folk or like Americana style I can think of that do that, but like someone like Aesop Rock, for example, is someone who I was always like perplexed by, because I could never nod my head to an Aesop Rock song, because he just would rap
Definitely.
irrespective of what the beat or the rhythm of the song was. And
Yeah.
just make up his own metering, like irrespective of whatever his producer made for him.
I mean, I think rap especially is kind of unique in that respect because it is kind of a big focus on the front man, and I suppose that even is something that hip hop would have in common with folk music is the emphasis on the performer doing their version of what they're doing, I suppose, as opposed to falling in line behind a big band where you're performing under a group and you don't have to necessarily take front and center and I suppose fall in line and really work around other people as much as you can in these genres.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. It's interesting to think about. I hadn't thought about like the connection between basically you do need that frontman mentality because you are the one who is carrying the set.
Right.
That makes sense. So when you put on your producer hat, what do you look for when you're trying to craft an album? And I guess I should back up. How many albums have you made? Because you said albums earlier.
I've recorded about 4 albums. I've been recording music since high school. I mean, I just would, do very simple things or even covers and just work in GarageBand on my laptop or whatever. And that's actually how I recorded my first 2 albums. I recorded probably like 20 or so random tracks throughout high school and my very early college years that I eventually just compiled into I didn't compile them all because I only wanted to do the ones I actually liked. So I compiled 6 tracks into an EP that I threw together through online, and then I recorded my first cohesive attempt at actually songwriting and crafting songs that I was working on into a finished product. I did that my sophomore year of college, and the result was all right. I'm glad I actually kept up with that, kept up with that type of work as opposed to just letting it, not practicing as much with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been writing songs for a while, but recording them is always a little bit of a different. It's a type of work, but it's just a different part of the same process. So I'm glad I kept producing because I actually got better at it. And I released my 3rd album. I released that in 2015, I believe. It was titled Cynic, and that was kind of more like my the type of songwriting that I've kind of grown into more. And I suppose Cynic and Are You Even Nice are the only 2 publicly available on my Bandcamp at this point.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, because for me, Are You Even Nice was kind of like a coming out party for like Joe Bartel, the musician.
It's definitely a great introduction, I suppose, to my songwriting. I would prefer that to any other album I've made in the past.
I suppose it's good that you feel like you're getting better. That's important.
Yeah, Are You Even Nice is definitely the best songwriting I've done so far, and definitely the best production.
Okay.
Not to toot my own horn, as it were, or use that phrase, but
yeah. Well, okay. So I guess let's talk about Are You Even Nice, because that's the work that I'm familiar with. When you were in your producing mode, did you feel like, okay, I need to compile 10, 11 songs? I'm actually not sure how many songs there are. I'm sorry.
It's 10. Yep.
10. Okay. Did you feel like, okay, I need a handful of songs, 2 handfuls of songs maybe, which will, all correspond to like the same thesis? Like did you feel like they all need to be connected in some thematic way?
Not necessarily. I would just say they were these were the songs that I had almost written for for this album. I had them all kind of floating around as almost three-quarters of ideas, and then I decided these are the songs that I've been waiting to finish for a while, so I'm just gonna finally do it. So I kind of sat down over a few months and just made sure they were all done and exactly written the way that I wanted to write them. But I wouldn't say there was one connecting thesis behind all the songs.
Sure. Which song on the album do you think took you the longest to complete, from like the first gestation of kind of like a line or like a hook that you'd really like to being recorded?
Let's see. Several of these songs I completely wrote in one session, whereas others, yeah, I had them floating around for a long while. I would say, well, I wrote early summer 2012 in 2012.
Sure.
So I suppose that's the oldest.
That was one of my favorite songs on the album, actually. I really enjoyed that one. Was that an organ that you were playing?
Oh, that's all melodica.
Okay, cool. It had a really nice feel to it. It felt immediately nostalgic hearing those keys. It was nice.
Yeah, I suppose organ was kind of like sound I was trying to, I guess, not replicate, but pay homage to, essentially. I mean, I have a melodica that I play a ton, so I suppose if I'd had access to an organ, I would have used that, potentially an accordion, or maybe even some strings. But I mean, I'm happy with all of the instrumentation on this album, so I guess I won't say I would change it.
Okay, cool. Do you have all of the recording equipment that you need to make an album? Do you have like a decent microphone and like some soundproofed walls and the software that you need to record on?
Yeah, I mean, I've got the whole stuff that I record with here in my apartment. I've recorded a couple other projects as well in addition to mine. I've got just a dynamic and a condenser microphone. I've got the input, as well as I record to Logic on my computer, and I've got some speakers and headphones, and you do it all as well as you can. I mean, it's not I'm not recording in a professional studio here, but there are plenty of techniques you can use for DIY recording that yield you great results.
Sure. I mean, that's something I'm learning on this end as well. Coming into it with almost no equipment, it's surprising how well you can do if you just try to find some good software and some decent hardware.
Sure.
Do you said that you have actually provided like a space for other artists to record with your stuff too?
Yeah, I've actually I've been recording a family friend who's got a few albums written, and I've also been recording my friend Jessie, who is I actually went to high school with her, and she's been playing out and kind of writing songs in the same vein. Just she's done a few open mics with me, and so we decided, hey, let's get some of your tracks recorded, because she's got a ton of songs written, but just had never had any actual official recordings done yet.
Right on. Cool. How do you advertise for yourself? You said that your music is on Bandcamp. Is that pretty much the only place that it's publicly available?
Yeah, you can find my music on Bandcamp, as well as, I mean, almost most places you get your music, theoretically. I'm on Spotify, iTunes. Where else do people listen to music? I listen to music on Spotify, so as long as I'm on there, that's the big name. But I'm on Apple Music. I'm on typically wherever you get your music, I think.
And that's all done by you? That's all, you just decided that you wanted to be at all of those streaming services and made it happen?
Yeah, yeah, there are pretty simple services online that make it possible for indie musicians to have their stuff publicly available like that. And I mean, it's a small cost, but I would say just the value of having your music available on Spotify to anyone who wants to listen to it on that platform on the go, or put it in playlists, or become affiliated with other artists on that platform. It's pretty valuable for indie artists in that respect, I would say.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, even with Bandcamp, I downloaded the album, and now on my MP3 player, I have Joe Bartel, which must be kind of a surreal experience to know that your name exists in other people's MP3 players.
Yeah, it's always very humbling.
Yeah, very cool. So how do you set up gigs? You said that you play about one open mic a week. Do you actively try to look for paid gigs, or do you prefer to just kind of do a no commitment way of just playing when you want to, how you want to?
I love doing open mics because there's always a great community behind them, as well as the venues are always typically pretty fun, and you get to meet a lot of good performers that way. But as far as setting up like official gigs, open mics are a good source of meeting contacts for that. But honestly, the oh man, the most fun part of being a musician is sending emails, baby. Yep. Any indie musician will tell you the most rewarding part of booking gigs is sending email after email after email. That's the behind the scenes work that nobody will tell you about being a musician. It is 75% sending emails.
Okay. Who are your goals? Who are your targets for these emails?
I'm actually booking a tour for this fall. So I've been attempting to book out of state more, which is first for me. But typically, you get the email of the bar's promoter or the cafe or wherever you're trying to play, and you send it out. Usually, I mean, in Minneapolis, booking is it's kind of, it's a big city, but it's also not a very big city. So a lot of people know each other. So you kind of just get to know these contacts for people who book at various bars, coffee shops, establishments, what have you. Coffee shops are really fun to play in as well, and they're typically just booked by whoever the general manager is. So you give them a call and ask to set up a date, and that's the simplest format for that type of show.
Okay, cool. And I mean, Minneapolis, I've always been really proud of the fact that we seem to have a pretty vibrant art scene. We seem to be a city, or I'm saying Minneapolis really seems to be a city which really tries to support the arts. So it makes sense that you would be able to find kind of a community there.
Right.
It's very cool. So you are setting up a tour. Is this the first tour that you've done?
Yes, this will be Joe Bartel's first time on the road.
Oh.
I've played a few shows out of Minneapolis. I've played in like Bismarck, North Dakota. I've played in Duluth and a few other places, but I have never formally done a multi-date tour, as it were. But I'm really excited for it.
Very cool. So in many of your songs, you will have kind of like a rhythm guitar and a lead guitar, and sometimes you have an acoustic guitar plus a electric guitar. What are your plans for that like multi-instrument work when you're touring? Do you need a backup band?
Nope, it's just going to be me, myself, and I. I mean, I write all my songs on an acoustic guitar to begin with anyway, so I feel to be authentic, they kind of need to work on that medium. But yeah, I'm just going to be bringing myself, my acoustic, and maybe a couple other small instruments to do little solo pieces. But right now, yeah, that's my plan. At this point is just me and the guitar.
Okay. Very cool. So how do you, I guess, like, how do you live when you're on the road? And this is your first time, I know, but like, are you going to be buying hotel rooms? Are you going to be sleeping in your car? What are your plans when you're traveling?
There'll be a bit of all of the above. I'll be gone for approximately 13 days. And yeah, I'll be playing a lot of house shows, so I'll be able to sleep at their house after the gig, as well as yeah, I'm gonna be car sleeping it. There might be a few nights in the Walmart parking lot,
Sure.
but I also, you book in a way that you kind of know people in several cities at least. So I'll be swinging through cities where I have friends and family who will be able to at least put me up for one night. But there will be a couple nights of car camping.
Very cool. That's exciting. It's a new frontier.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm ready for it. I've slept in my car before. I'm not scared of it.
Yeah. Bring a decent pillow and a blanket, and you'll be fine.
Yep.
So, Joe, who are some of your biggest musical influences? Who are some people that you really feel have inspired you to make music, or whose music you almost find yourself emulating at certain points?
I mean, honestly, that's I've got a pretty wide range of influence. I would say, I mean, obviously the first album I ever owned was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. My dad gave me that one on CD when I was, I don't even remember. I was I was a youngster. And then, I mean, as I was more able to, find and consume my own types of music, I guess I grew beyond the classic rock influences. I mean, I've always loved the Beatles and Bob Dylan, but I would say The Clash was probably the biggest influence on me as a middle schooler, when I was really kind of coming into my own with playing music and that sort of thing. Then, you got the Dead Kennedys, Ramones, a ton of other punk bands that have influenced me in a lot of ways. As well as, well, let's just start rattling off some names. I love a lot of folk punk music, so I love Andrew Jackson Jihad, Days and Days, Ramshackle Glory, a ton of just kind of these underground folk punk bands.
I've never heard the subgenre folk punk. I had no idea that was a thing which existed.
Oh, that's an important classification, I guess, if we're going to be talking about my music. Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of stuff out there. But I also like a lot of other genres. I really like Gorillaz. I like LCD Sound System a ton. I love even some pop acts. I love Blur and Oasis. I mean, Oasis are a little much for me sometimes, even. But
well, if you like the Gorillaz, you've got to like Blur.
Exactly. It's an organic offshoot for sure. Yeah. And I like a lot of rap acts as well. I love Death Grips right now, of course. And you've got A Tribe Called Quest was a big one growing up for me in high school, as well as Beastie Boys. Oh my God, I could just start naming off all the rap albums I listened to a ton in middle school. But yeah, I mean, there's always been an eclectic influence of various genres, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to say that just because you play a certain genre of music that is the genre of music which has most inspired you to become a musician.
Right. Folk punk has definitely been a very important thing for me in the past, but it's definitely also just, yeah, like you said, the kind of music you play is not the only thing you consume.
Yeah. And so do you define yourself as kind of like a folk punk artist? Is that your definition of your music?
Folk punk is kind of hard to define, and even I'm not always sure that that's the correct that's what the terminology should be. But I mean, yeah, folk punk is a pretty well established genre as far as musical acts that have created music in the past. And I mean, I don't even, like I said, I don't know if folk punk is always necessarily the right term. You could say like dark folk or like acoustic punk or like I don't know. There's some anti-folk, indie punk, maybe. There's a lot of it. It's kind of just folk instrumentation with punk sensibilities potentially would be the I guess the widest umbrella you could pitch.
And how do you feel about kind of demarcating music by genre? Is that something which do you think is important to know, like just to know the different definitions of the music, or do you think that that's inhibitory in some ways? What are your thoughts on genres and subgenres?
I guess I would call genres limiting but necessary. I mean, it's definitely like, it's helpful and accurate to say something would be, to call something folk music or to call something rock music or to call something blues. Like it may be pigeonholing the sound, but it also is like unnecessary evil potentially. Sure. I mean, I don't personally, want to show up for a show not knowing, what kind of band you're. I mean, people don't always want to go to a certain kind of or listen to a certain kind of music. Like if you're not into metal music, you don't want to accidentally show up to a metal show or something like that. Though I suppose that may not be the best analogy.
No, yeah, I definitely understand that, and it's kind of like how you would demarcate between different forms of knowledge. Like you have a geologist who might do different things than like a geomorphologist who would do something different than like a geographer or.
Sure, and you can get as specific or non-specific as you truly want to with that.
Yeah. Now I guess that's true.
You can be as generic as just scientist,
right.
Or even as specific as like studying, specific regions.
Yeah. I guess that's always going to be a problem because like when you do define and subdefine, it becomes kind of limiting because you feel like those are the frameworks with which you can like work in. But then I mean, it's also kind of nice because if you want to know about like the phosphorus content of soil, you're not going to ask a psychologist about that.
Exactly.
Okay, and then like I guess like do you feel that there are some ways which you break musical convention? Because like for me, like for instance, when I listen to like the Strokes, you have the lead singer's, I've always forget his name, Julian something. The lead singer of the Strokes has kind of like a almost like a whiny, like mournful voice, which I feel is almost kind of out of place with kind of like the hard like speed rock that his band is playing. And so like I feel like in some ways you have bands which can be very defined by genre yet in several ways step outside that demarcation. Do you feel that there are some ways that your music kind of straddles a number of genres?
Yeah, that's definitely the case, especially I think for a lot of singer-songwriters like myself. Like just because you see someone, you see someone holding an acoustic guitar, that doesn't necessarily pigeonhole them to any specific genre. I mean, just one person with a guitar can play any kind of song, frankly. It doesn't necessarily mean that all singer-songwriters are folk musicians or even that they're all, I don't know. I always have trouble with this when I mean, in my local scene, I play some of probably the most aggressive singer-songwriter style music, whereas that's technically the same genre as the people who are just getting up there and playing, a very soft and sweet song on an acoustic guitar as well. So it's tough, especially as a solo artist, to overcome that sort of thing. But I guess a label like folk punk kind of, as much as it pigeonholes a genre of music, it also allows a scene to be created around it. So I can specifically look for fans of these types of bands and think, hey, this is the type of person who is going to like this genre of music that I am also playing. And it's a completely different style of acoustic music than, so any other person who just happens to have an acoustic guitar. So it's in that sort of live scene, it's helpful to have a genre to pitch yourself a little bit behind.
Sure. Yeah. Like, especially if you know that, a area or like a cafe or a bar looks for specific types of acts, that makes sense why you
exactly
to kind of accommodate yourself to those definitions.
Exactly.
I guess it's a problem that's larger than just music, or I guess it's a challenge that's larger than music because we're conventionally defined by like the type of work that we do, or how
Yeah.
we look, or like the type of people that we spend time with. But that doesn't necessarily define you as a person. But it is kind of a shorthand way of knowing how to interact with different people and knowing like what common interests you could find with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, especially like as someone who has to, as a musician who has to promote their own work, it's helpful to just not be, shooting into the dark.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely believe that. Are You Even Nice came out in 2016, right?
Yes, November.
Okay. So, a little bit less than a year out from your album, do you feel that its content is still kind of true to your point of view now? I guess when you said earlier that although your songs are mostly written in first person, they don't necessarily represent you or like things that you have been through. But do you listen to your album now and think like, yeah, that's a true feeling that I still like evoking, or that I still feel evoked by?
Yeah, I guess I would say so. There's no songs on this album I would actively renounce, at least to say the least. Like I wasn't, and I mean a lot of them are kind of like darker style songwriting, but that's just kind of the genre I am working around and the type of music I'm writing at this time. And I guess it's not, a happier song or a sad song or whatever. It's kind of almost a universal type message. Just because like I'm not feeling that today doesn't mean that's something I won't be feeling tomorrow potentially.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, to your point of like, I don't know, songs which I guess to my point, not to your point, there are certain songs in this album that I really find myself drawn to, and songs that I like find myself going back to when I give it re-listens. For
Sure.
instance, I really like You Don't Deserve It, because I really like kind of that surly, really just like facetious, just like anger that I get from the album, or from that song on the album. It really it strikes a chord in me that I can really appreciate.
Sure.
And I mean, songs like Why Am I Like This and Puppy Dog, I really found myself going back to. And as I said earlier, I really like the feeling which you were able to evoke in early summer 2012. So
Yeah.
that was there are definitely songs which I find myself I guess understanding on an emotional level, like that I can really find some sort of connection with. So that's really interesting, because I mean, as you said, a lot of this album is kind of dark, and I kind of almost equated it to like journal entries at some points. Like it almost felt like I could have like opened up like a journal which you held, and like saw these as like, today this asshole, this preppy beautiful person was a total dickhead to innocent people, and so I wrote You Don't Deserve It. Like I could
Sure.
I could totally see it almost being a look into your journal. And I know a lot of people who I've talked to who like to journal complain that like they only find themselves journaling when they're in like massive existential turmoil, and so when they look back in their journal, it's just darkness, whether or not that's how they feel on the whole.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that's definitely like a tendency. You kind of like, anger and wrath is a very strong emotion, so it kind of speaks louder than the others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not many people can write a very effective or, I guess, meaningful song about having a pleasant day where
Right.
things went right, and you had a cup of coffee, which was not extraordinary, but better than average, and, things like that. It's a little bit harder to find the inspiration to write during those times.
I definitely write less when I'm happy. So
Sure.
I mean,
yeah, and I mean, I think some of the best art that I have experienced has always maybe not always, but very often come from a artist who was suffering during that period. I mean, most art, I think, is born from kind of a psyche which feels like it needs some sort of release valve.
Right. And I mean, I obviously have a life that I am very happy with, and I won't I will acknowledge the relatively well-off position that I am in society, but to exist is to suffer. You're born suffering, and you're gonna suffer every moment you're conscious until the day you die, because to be conscious is to suffer. So that is something that I would say the existential dread of it all is a lot more of an influence than anything else.
Sure. Okay. And so the idea that to exist is to suffer, is that kind of, I mean, I guess like the feeling that I get from Are You Even Nice is like a narrator which feels a little bit, I don't want to say left behind, but like a narrator which feels at least frustration, at least frustration over what's happening around him.
It's a frustration with the inherent absurdity of the universe, I suppose, more than anything. But it's also a personal examination as well.
Yeah, and to that point, it's always hard, because I know I found it before in writing, where you can touch on like a feeling which you then try to, you really try to have shine through with your work, but then that work then is not necessarily the feeling that you had. It's kind of like a stylistic abstraction of some idea which you had. And I guess that's going back to why I asked you if there's anything that you would feel uncomfortable writing about, because in a lot of ways, I think that a lot of people are kind of afraid about airing their dirty laundry. A lot of people are afraid that people are going to listen to a piece of work or read a piece of writing and think wow, you have problems, man, are you okay? And I don't think that's necessarily fair, because a piece of work doesn't necessarily represent your psyche in that moment. It's an abstraction. It's this stylization.
Yeah, I've played open mic sets where sweet motherly figures have come up and tried to hug me afterwards and asked if I'm all right. But I mean, I think, you said it earlier, abstraction is a good term, I think. It's a synthesis maybe of many different events or feelings or emotions or perspectives or whatever. I think I said earlier that it's, especially in folk music more than punk music, songwriting is a lot of storytelling and just almost a narrative in a way. But just because it's a narrative doesn't mean it's true. I think I might have called that a lie. But I guess an abstraction is a better term for it. But just because, everyone has felt anger, pure wrath, betrayal, happiness, joy, frustration, forgiveness. Everyone's felt these things in some capacity. So I think music is just a way of reaching these things out to other people, and it doesn't need to be taken as literally as some people maybe want to, but it also doesn't have to not be. Maybe my songs are entirely literal and I'm bullshitting right now.
It's hard to tell.
You don't know. You just don't
know. Joe, where can people find you? Where can interested listeners find your work and hear some of the songs that we're talking about right now?
You can find them wherever you get your music, hopefully. If you want to look me up on Spotify and add me to your playlist that you just loop constantly and get me a ton of plays on there, that'd be cool. I'm on Spotify, Apple Music, Bandcamp, of course, joebartel.bandcamp.com. I'm on almost all the streaming services, I think. You can also hit me up on Facebook. You can look for Joe Bartel on there. There's you might hear me if you go down to the the Stone Arch Bridge, and someone's playing guitar there, and it might be me. You might hear me. You might hear me at Moto I Open Mic this week. I'm kind of ubiquitous. If you look for me, I might be there.
Okay, so anywhere in the Minneapolis area, look for a white man with a beard and a guitar.
You might see a lot of them, but one of them might be me.
Well, Joe, I'll make sure to link your Spotify profile and whatever else you'd like me to link for you. When is your tour going to begin?
I will be playing in Minneapolis on September 25th, and then I will leave for Des Moines the next day, and then I'm playing throughout the Midwest until October 10th, I believe. And then I come back to Minneapolis and I do a few more local gigs in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a couple in Duluth. Very cool. Well, so the entire thing will be from like September 25th to like October 25th, but I'll be gone out of town for only half of that. Okay. Lovely. Well, I will make sure to spread the word as much as I can. Joe, thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated it, man. It's been good talking to you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Learner's Permit. And just as a heads up, you can now download all of our podcast episodes of both Learner's Permit and Digital North, as well as stream both of them by visiting us at curiousmagnet.com. And make sure to stay up to date on our new releases by following us on Facebook at The Curious Magnet. We'll also continue to release all of our episodes on YouTube, so if you prefer, you can watch us that way. Thanks so much, and stay curious.